Good morning. It is wonderful to be in worship together on this beautiful morning. We are continuing our series we started last week, The Gospel According to Dogs, what our four-legged friends have to teach us. It's a lighthearted series that really points to the good news, and that's what we celebrate every Sunday. The Gospel According to Dogs is the series. Gospel is from an Old English word, Godspell, that means good news. And that's what we share today. Last week, we talked about the special abilities that dogs have, and we reminded ourselves that we also have special abilities and talents, that we are gifted, and that God calls us to use them. Our message last week was, use what God has given you. Today's the message is trust and obey. Trust and obey. And it's from the 23rd Psalm that we gain the images that we've talked about already in the service and that the psalmist used in speaking of his relationship with God. This is a psalm of David. David, of course, was a shepherd. And so David likened his relationship with God as the relationship between sheep and shepherd. And so this reminds us that the practice of using domesticated animals in their relationship with their people, in this case a shepherd, is an old practice indeed, dating back at least to the Hebrew Scriptures. Dogs are the first animals to be domesticated. Probably 32 or 33,000 years ago, dogs were first domesticated, maybe 10,000 years before sheep were domesticated. And this Psalm of David points out that trust and the provision of the shepherd really are at the heart of this relationship. Trust in the shepherd on the part of the sheep, and the provision and the graciousness, the gracious care on the part of the shepherd. And so the images are powerful here, especially if you are familiar with sheep and shepherding, as of course David was, and those who first recited these words certainly would have been. They would look out on any day in the Judean wilderness or elsewhere and be able to see shepherds tending their flocks, leading their sheep. And they could connect with this image. Perhaps for us, we can connect with the image of dogs and their people as we think about that relationship of trust and obedience and provision. So the psalmist says that the Lord is our shepherd, we shall not want. And the psalmist is speaking very personally, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and begins to describe what that means. In the hectic pace of the journey of life, when rest is needed, the Lord provides a resting place, a time to be still, to lie down in green pastures, to be beside the still waters. 2 weeks ago, you know that if you were here, you know that we took the time to be still. We took the time out of our regularly planned services. In fact, we put this series off a week for us just to be still and be in the presence of one another and God, and to pray for our brothers and sisters who are hurting in so many places right now. And we use that Psalm 46, that says, "Be still and know that I am God." The provision of the shepherd is to provide those places of stillness, those places where we can remember who we are and whose we are. And David's psalm says that not only is there this provision for stillness, but there's a provision for everything that he needs. It's reminiscent of Jesus' words when he spoke about the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, who have everything they need even though they don't have to work to earn it. And he reminds us of the gracious provision of God and to rest in the knowledge that God has given what we need. And so when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he is speaking to this provision as well. Now, on the other side of that is this trust and obedience. Trust and obedience. And we turn to the other domesticated animal that is the center of our series, and that's our dogs. Now, I don't know if you may or may not be a dog person, but certainly you at least know a dog person. And you know how dog people feel about their dogs and how dogs feel about their dog people. It is a special relationship. But part of that relationship is trust. Because a dog, a domestic dog, is reliant on its people. It doesn't go hunting. It doesn't hunt in packs. It doesn't have access to food and shelter and water, certainly in an urban setting, unless a person provides it. There is this relationship of trust. We have two dogs. We have a Yorkie Poo, that is a Yorkshire Poodle mix, a 5-pounder. He was the first dog we we acquired at least after we came to Fort Worth. And so I had this 5-pound dog, and your beloved pastor and my pastor and friend, Linda McDermott, incessantly made fun of me for my very manly dog that I had, this 5-pound Yorkie Poo. But what a great dog he is. That's Jack. So we acquired another dog, an 85-pound, what turned out to be an 85-pound Labradoodle named Teddy. Those dogs are dependent on us. We feed them. We provide them shelter. We spoil them, quite frankly. We provide them with medical care, and they trust us. They trust. And we provide. That's the nature of that relationship. The good news of our faith is that God is trustworthy. And even in the times when our journey of life takes us through the darkest valley, or the valley of the shadow of death, as the King James Version has it, we are not alone in that valley. We can trust that God is with us. We say it every Sunday when we recite the Creed. God is with us. We are not alone. In life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We say that every Sunday. It is that relationship of trust in the trustworthiness of God that sustains us, even in the darkest valleys. But trust and obedience are bound up together. Our dogs trust that we will take care of them, and we do. But we also expect them to be, at least most of the time, obedient. Because that obedience has to do with the provision. We expect them when we walk them that they will be obedient so they don't get out in the street and get hurt. We expect them to be obedient so that they will be protected. This trust and obedience go hand in hand for a dog and for the dog's people. Well, that's true of us as well. And we struggle with that, don't we? Don't we wrestle with that? Nobody bats 1,000 when it comes to obedience. I mean, we say as United Methodists, we're going on to perfection, to being made perfect in love in this life, but we're going on. We're headed in that direction. And obedience can be a challenge for us, and so can this whole trust issue as well. 10 years ago, this coming December, in my own spiritual life, I was wrestling with this whole matter of trust, really trusting in the future, really wanting time to slow down a bit, feeling like things were moving too fast and uncertain about the future. It was where I was in my life at that point spiritually, and I wrote this prose poem. I wanted to share it with you. I hadn't read it in 10 years, and I remembered it as I was preparing for this sermon today, and I brought it out. And so I want to share that with you. And as I read it, I want you to think about whether this speaks to you or has spoken to you. It's called The Pull of Time. And I wrote it when one of our dogs was a little puppy learning to be led on a leash. My little dog pulls back against his leash, not wanting to go forward. He tries to dig his claws into the slick floor, but his efforts are in vain. His strength and resolve are no match for mine. He wants to stop the forward motion, but he can't. He slides forward, motionless, but moving nonetheless. There is resolve in those eyes, but it is gradually giving way to resignation. There's defiance in his eyes, but it is gradually giving way to acceptance. There is mistrust in his eyes, but it is gradually giving way to trust. He begins to relax. He begins to move his legs in concert with the forward motion. The struggle abates as he makes his way forward, cooperating voluntarily now with what will happen anyway. I pull back against time, not wanting to go forward. I try to dig in, but time pulls on a slick floor and my efforts are in vain. My strength and my resolve are no match for the pull of time. I want to stop the forward motion, but I can't. I slide forward, motionless, but moving nonetheless. My resolve is gradually giving way to resignation. My defiance is gradually giving way to acceptance. My mistrust is gradually giving way to trust. I begin to relax. I begin to move and live in concert with the forward motion. The struggle abates as I make my way forward, cooperating voluntarily now with the passage of time. It's that wrestling with this whole issue of trust, isn't it? And obedience is bound up in that. One of the struggles that we have as we look around us is this sense that we don't quite know the direction to go, and it calls for this immense trust for us to be led. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. And Jesus came not only to give his life for us, but Jesus also came to show us the way and to teach and calls us to follow in his footsteps. But we wrestle, don't we, with how to go and what to do sometimes. The psalmist wrestled with this and concluded that it is the shepherd who knows the right paths of righteousness, King James Version translates it. But it refers to those correct paths, those safe paths in the craggy, rough Judean wilderness that the shepherds use, and they've been used for centuries, and you can go there now and see the shepherds leading their sheep on those same paths, the right paths, the paths of righteousness, the King James Version has it. Halford Luckock, back in the 1950s, preached a sermon that became his best-known sermon. He was a well-known preacher, and the sermon was called Marching Off the Map. He named that sermon from a message that a Roman centurion sent back to Rome, a Roman commander sent back to Rome when he had marched with his troops beyond where the cartographers had been able to draw a map. They were in uncharted territory, and he sent a message back with this messenger that asked for instructions and said, we have marched off the map. Halford Luckock in the 1950s used that as an image to talk about the pace of change and all that was happening in our world, and he said, we have marched off the map. We don't know which way to go. If that was true in the 1950s, friends, it is even more true today, is it not? You can name any map, whether it is an economic map, whether it is a national security map, whether it is a moral map, an ethical map, economic map. Name a map. And we have that sense, don't we, that we don't quite know where we are. We're in uncharted territory. And so this reminder of trust in what Jesus taught us, trust in the way Jesus taught us to live, trust in the way that Jesus taught and led us to conduct ourselves, who we are and what we are to do. This is part of trust. So trust and obedience go hand in hand. And, you know, nobody is perfect. Nobody bats 1,000, and that's certainly true of our dogs. You know, I said last week that dogs are the only creature that make eye contact with us and hold eye contact with us. And that's true unless they've done something wrong. We will arrive home and there's maybe a shredded paper towel on the floor, something like that. And all we have to do is look at our two dogs who are looking at us and say, who did this? And the one that does this is the guilty party. In our relationship with God, don't we often find ourselves doing this? Afraid to face God when we have fallen short of who God calls us to be, when we've hurt someone, when we've been disobedient in the living of our lives as Jesus calls us to live them. And yet, God's loving gaze is still there. If we turn back and look, the love is still there. That's the good news of our faith. Years ago, I shared with you, I think it's been 13 years ago now, I shared with you that my father kept a video archive. I'm sorry, I keep saying video, an audio archive of our family. He was an early adopter of technology. And so in the 1940s, he bought this device called a recordio, which actually used a hot needle to burn the soundtrack in a wax disc and made a record that could be played on any record player. And when he got a reel-to-reel recorder in December of 1959, he recorded all those old discs over to the reel-to-reel tapes, and then I subsequently put them on cassette tapes, and I suppose when I find the time, they'll go on CDs. But this is an audio archive, really, of the family. These are people who've gone before us, and their voices speaking to us. And I share that with you because my favorite recording, well, among my favorite recordings, is my great-grandmother's 87th birthday in February of 1960. It was my great-grandmother's birthday, 87th. My father wanted to get her voice on this recording. He had this new reel-to-reel recorder. And so he wanted her to recite something, and somebody in the room suggested she recite the 23rd Psalm. And next came a priceless moment that we never let my father forget as long as he lived. Because she hesitated before beginning the 23rd Psalm, and my father, the biblical scholar, wanted to prompt her, and so he said, "You know, now I lay me down to sleep." In spite of my father's coaching, she found the words and she recited the 23rd Psalm. And there is that precious, soft Southern drawl with the soft R's, you know. The Lord is my shepherd. Beautiful. She recited the psalm. I listen to that and I think about her at age 87 and all she had gone through in her life when she and her husband were in their 30s. They had had their last child. He very suddenly died. And she was left to raise those children on her own. She had a difficult life. But she could still say the psalm. She still lived by the psalm. She knew the psalm, and she, of course, knew the shepherd about whom the psalm was written. It's powerful. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And she ends it, of course, with, "Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." So with that in mind, I want to close with a story. It's a story that John Bailey told many, many years ago about a country doctor who, as he made his rounds house to house, he took his dog with him most of the time. He came to visit a man who was terminally ill. The doctor came to tell him so, that there was nothing more he could do. And he delivered that news, and they sat in silence for a long time. And finally the man said, "Doctor, what is it like to die?" He didn't immediately have an answer, and so they sat in silence for a while longer as he thought about what he could tell this man, his friend and patient. As they sat there in silence, they heard scratching at the door, and the doctor had the words he needed. And so he said, "Do you hear that? That's my dog. He's never been in here. He doesn't know what's on the other side of the door, but he knows I'm here. And because of that, he knows everything's okay." He said, "That's what it's like to die. We don't know what's on the other side. We don't know what is beyond this life, but we know God is there. And because of that, it's okay." That's the good news of our faith that we celebrate. May we go from this place as those who trust and obey. Amen. Now, kids of all ages, I thought it might be fun for you to meet this dog I'm always talking about, Teddy. And so Susan is going to bring Teddy in for you all to see Teddy. This is our Labradoodle. Here he comes, and you'll note that it's hard to tell whether Susan's walking him or he's walking Susan. This is Teddy. She's got him on a short leash. Hey, Teddy. Hey, boy. Hey, boy. Okay. Here we go. All right. Good boy. Good boy. You want to be greeted by Teddy? There you go. So this is Teddy. This is one of our dogs. The other one's kind of old and hard for him to get around, the little one. So he's safely at home. But I wanted you to have a chance to see Teddy. Yeah, a manly dog. A manly dog, Linda just said. That's right. That's right. Okay. Thanks. Good boy. He was good, wasn't he? No. She said no. So apparently not before he came in. I don't know.